that first year was very hard. And I named that in the part that I wrote at the end of the book, that the first year was challenging. You're trying to do all these things that you did in a treatment center that you learned how to do, and they were hard for a long time, but then they became more manageable in the confines of a treatment center, which feels pretty safe. And then you try to do the same things in the real world, and it feels harder.
Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 470. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and celebrated mother and daughter authors, Nancy and Rachel Levine.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, sure. Welcome. Yeah. This is exciting. So you guys are members. You recently wrote a book together back in August, and it is called Light: A Mother and Daughter Memoir of Anorexia. So I guess my first question to you all was, so what inspired you to kind of tell this family story at this particular moment?
That is a really good question. I had started the memoir many years ago, and then I was never quite happy with it, and I just felt like something was missing. And when you write, you do revision after revision after revision, and I just knew something wasn't right. So at that point, I asked Rachel if she would come in on the book with me, and at that she was generous enough to share her journal entries, which were beautiful, and explained everything she felt about being an anorexic. And once I had her journals in there and we were discussing the power of what's called an eating disorder voice, everything fell into place. And then I wasn't quite ready to publish it, because then it was the pandemic and it just didn't seem like it was the time. And then when things settled down after the pandemic, I was ready to go forward. Also, we were finding out that due to the pandemic, there were many people with anorexia that weren't getting treated well. They kind of had a hard time connecting with therapists during the pandemic. There was more stress, so there were more cases of eating disorders. So it seemed like it was really the right time. And the other thing that made it the right time was, by then, Rachel had been in a solid recovery for several years, many years. And we wanted an arc of before she was anorexic, then her illness, and then her recovery. And to show people that you can be in recovery and healthy after anorexia. So it was nice to have this arc of the story.
When you're kind of helping your mom put this memoir together, how did it feel to kind of revisit some of your journal writings at that point?
Yeah, honestly, I had so much space from the time that I wrote the journal entries. I wrote them around the year 2007, 2007, 2008. And by the time we got around to doing some of the deep work that we were doing with sort of trying to locate the journal entries that made the most sense to include, it had been, 10 years since I'd written them. So I think that helped a lot. Sometimes I sort of explain it as looking back at myself, but in many ways not recognizing that person, because it's just, it feels like a whole lifetime ago, even though it was 16, 17 years ago. It feels like much longer, because that person who wrote those journal entries was struggling in such a way that I have not experienced since in that same way. So it felt a little bit freeing to see the difference. It also felt painful to revisit how it did feel back in those early days when I started the journaling. So I think it was sort of like it was holding the two different feelings at once. In many ways, it felt great, and in some ways, it also brought back some of the pain that was the experience at the time.
And And Nancy, so as a mother, from a mother's perspective, how did your influence as a mother help structure Rachel's journal excerpts?
I mean, I would say that I think the immediate way that I'm thinking is just mainly the way they were written.
Yeah.
And I think certainly I've always been, right now the picture I see of you have 100 books behind you. And I think I grew up in a house that was rich with books and with lots of language. So I think if we're just talking about the technical side, I think that having access to so much, um, rich text and so many words, I think that helped me develop a writer's voice while I was in treatment. That was the first time I really journaled. I never really been someone that journaled before that. And then I think in
Hmm.
terms of context for the situation, I'm not sure that my mom or my dad per se impacted the way that the journal entries actually unfolded, but I think certainly elements of my childhood and elements of my story from childhood on were woven into them.
And then the follow-up for that, Rachel, is how did you see your mom's narrative voice change your understanding of your own experience, looking at it
I
like
would
13
say,
years later?
there was a lot of family therapy that was done throughout the time, throughout the whole experience. And
Yeah.
my parents were pretty transparent with me about the way that the illness was impacting our family, which is important to name. So I do think that there were no surprises when I heard the writer's voice that my mom had developed in the memoir. Certainly, it was sad to revisit the pain because
Mhm.
the memoir is full of humor and it's full of joy, and in many respects, it has a very happy ending, but there's also a lot of sadness interwoven throughout the pages.
Right.
So, revisiting some of that sadness and hearing her voice and hearing her pain certainly impacted me. And, it was painful to read, but it wasn't the first time I had experienced it. We were open enough throughout the process that I was able to understand, you know, before, during, and after the pain that the eating disorder had caused the family, and they did it in such a way that it was never blaming. I was never made to feel bad about it, but it was important to name the impact that it was having just the same, even though it wasn't intentional.
How did you negotiate what to include or to leave out? Either for privacy or for clarity or for emotional pacing, because the two of you kind of wrote the book together in a way. So how
Mhm.
did that how did that process work?
Well, from my point of view, uh, and one of the biggest honors of my life was doing this in tandem with Rachel.
Mhm.
Mm,
I was just so proud that we could do it together because what we wanted to do was make a book about advocacy, about hope, so that people reading it who were facing a similar issue could have something to hang on to.
right,
So it wasn't really that hard to figure out what to put in, actually.
right.
Were there things we left out? There's always things you're going to leave out of the memoir. Um, and things that we found too deeply personal really was family business. But the things we put in the memoir were things that every member of our family could see and
Mhm.
not be hurt by.
Right.
Mhm. Well, and there were no, anyone in the immediate family, the nuclear family, my brother, my mom, and my dad and I, no one would be reading this book and experiencing something for the first time.
Right.
So there was so much transparency already. And then there's we have had so much space from the onset of illness that shame is not really a part of this experience either. At this point, it would have been if we had written it earlier, I think. So we sort of went into this with nothing is truly off limits. The only boundary I really set was not a boundary to protect me, it was a boundary to protect readers. And I was very clear, and my mom very, very easily respected the boundary of just not including stats like weight or calories on a daily basis, things that would be very triggering to readers that at this point I can talk about very freely, but other folks that are actively engaged in eating disorders would not be able to read that without having a really hard time with it. So I just named, as I was reading the initial drafts, let's scratch that number, let's change that with a different word, let's put underweight instead of divulging information that would be painful for other people. And at this point, again, I'm comfortable with it, but it just didn't feel like it would be comfortable to the some of the audience that were reading the book who may be struggling.
Mm. And who do you see as the audience for this book? Is this something that the two of you wrote for yourselves, almost in like a cathartic piece, or is this something that you wrote for people to learn more about the experience, or is this something that you wanted to have, or is it something you wrote for people to be educated on anorexia?
I would say my mom, you answered too, but my response would be the latter. The idea is if the story can change any one person's trajectory or offer one person hope, then it was worth all of the sort of blood, sweat, and tears, as we say. I think that would be the major reason. I think it, and Mom, you can answer this. I think it may have also been cathartic, but I don't think that's why you wrote it.
Not really. I think what I was trying to do is when Rachel became anorexic, we were like, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen when she was a teenager. Why did it start at age almost 21? That she didn't seem to match up to what people thought about anorexia. And then I learned that a lot of the things I knew about anorexia were actually stigma. And I wanted to learn more about this illness, that it's part physiologic, it's brain, it's emotion, it's not all one thing. And so I wanted to kind of explore the roots and make anorexia understandable to other people who also didn't have that information that I had just gleaned.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Rachel, what would you say was the hardest memory that you agreed to share on the page?
Hardest memory? I mean, there were a lot of moments. I think that the way that the book begins is one of my favorite moments, but it was also a really hard moment. So when I went to this treatment center, there's a potbelly pig that lives at the treatment center, literally, who's facing a variety of medical issues himself. And I would say it wasn't a painful experience, but it really clearly states just what felt to us like utter insanity of the situation, that there's this very medically overweight potbelly pig, and then there's this very medically underweight young woman who have landed themselves at the same place, to maybe both of their shock or horror. And I think that was not, it wasn't a hard memory to share, but it was a hard moment of just facing the reality of the situation. I was in Reno, Nevada for treatment, a place I had never necessarily when you're imagining all the places to visit and putting the pin in all the places you travel in the world, I never really thought Reno, Nevada. And here I was in Reno, Nevada, the biggest little city in the world.
There we were in a pig pen.
In a pig pen. So it wasn't hard to share necessarily, but it, it was one of those moments of reckoning where like, this is what's real. Here we are.
What are we doing in this pig pen with this pig in an eating disorders treatment center? We didn't see life looking like this.
Yes. I would say, and one moment that was hard to share, but I was glad we shared it. And I was glad that my dad had the courage to allow it to be written too, is there's a portion where they're visiting me in Nevada and I had very strict rules about what I had to do and how I had to engage with food in order to have a shot at recovery. And we're at this restaurant and I'm not wanting any of the foods that they have because they're foods I wouldn't traditionally have ordered prior to treatment. And my dad, at this stage of his life when I'm in treatment is also has very rigid ideas about what's healthy and not healthy and what's nutritious for eating. And he orders something that, I'm not allowed to order. And then there's this whole scene at the restaurant. And I suppose it wasn't painful and I'm glad it's included, but it's one of those moments where you're like, well, if I was the type to be embarrassed or the type to have shame about a situation, I could see how that would be there. An adult woman making a scene at a restaurant. But at the same time, it was our truth and I'm not ashamed of it. It's part of our story. So I'm glad it's in there. And I'm glad my dad also was comfortable with that being included.
Yeah. Her dad, my husband, sees this. He was very adamant that we publish the book, where I was kind of holding back. And he said, this is a public health statement. This is an illness. This is part of public health. We have nothing to be ashamed of. And you two wrote a book, and you two need to get it published.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then, Nancy, so did you ever hesitate to include any parts of your own experience in the book?
We were pretty out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. We decided that we were going to go for broke. If we're going to do it, we're going to make it matter.
Okay.
But I think the space matters because you named that early on, Mom. Yeah. The space, the time. I think if we had written it 18 months after I discharged, we would have been a lot tickier with things and a lot more concerned about, do we include this? Do we include that? But I mean, at this point, I'm, at today in 2025, I'm like 17 years in recovery, right? So it feels less scary to share some of these things that have happened a while ago.
So how did writing this kind of change your relationship?
I don't know if it did, really. I mean, we were always pretty close.
Yeah, I don't think it did. We've been fortunate to have a very easygoing relationship for as long as I can remember, which is from forever. Yeah. So I don't think it necessarily changed anything. You have to show grace to one another. She had to show me grace when I said, take all the stuff out with the numbers because none of that could be in there. And, she was able to respectfully push back and say, I think the numbers could actually really help because a lot of people don't understand the severity of something without that medical information. And then I could push back and say, but our audience won't all be able to manage that. It could be too painful. And then she said, great, moving on. Yeah. So we're able to have respectful dialogue back and forth. And I think that's something that we've relationally built over a lot of time. So if anything, it's been cool because there's a little bit of extra, like I was out in Vermont in September to do a book reading, and that was fun because I don't normally get to go to Vermont in September. So it gives us a couple more excuses to visit, which is fun since we're, in different states. But I would say if anything, the relationship, it's built a new layer of our relationship and a really cool layer.
Yeah, it was. The only thing that was hard was when it came to the final editing, all the pages I wrote got edited much more heavily than Rachel's. That's not right.
I also told you I have 8% of the book. So I should have, if I have more edits, we have a big problem.
But she had 0 edits, maybe one comma out of place. And I'm like, oh dear.
Yeah, commas are hard. I think we can all agree that commas are hard
unless you're an English person. Commas have always been hard for you. But nothing, her narrative voice was extraordinarily believable and strong. You never doubted what she was saying. She never came off as a narrator who you were skeptical of.
I think when you're telling your own truth, it's easy, right? When you're telling your own story and it's based in reality, it's easy to storytell because it's all you have, right? It's what you know.
Yeah.
Right. How different is the final draft published work of the book as compared to the first draft?
Well, the first draft, probably draft 1 through 5, I didn't dare show anybody. And I wasn't sure how to write a book, of course. So when I decided I needed to write, I went to Vermont College of Fine Arts and got an MFA.
Well, and it's worth mentioning, you're a career nurse. So you had a big career as a nurse and that you weren't writing a memoir at that time.
No. So I had to go off to school to figure out how to do this. And so, believe me, the mentors in graduate programs, they want to teach you how to do it. Yeah, they had ideas.
But as Rachel mentioned, so you're a former pediatric neurology nurse, correct?
Yes.
So what medical or health insights did you bring into the book?
Well, excuse me. I was interested in what eating disorders do to the brain, and how something, for example, anorexia, can change the neurochemistry of the brain. And so until certain factors are fixed, the person's not going to get well again. So we found this little treatment center in Reno, of all places, where the director was board certified in both neurology in psychiatry. And we're like, zoom, this is where we're going. She gets it. And she had fairly high success rates because she was looking at that biomedical psychiatric triad, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
We felt if Rachel was going to recover well, this is where she would do it. And she did.
I guess also too, Rachel, when you were looking back at this and looking at your journals, as you said, 17 years, was it, we said 17 years ago it was?
I always
The
do this in
beginning?
my head. I go, how many years has it been? I think I just celebrated 16 last spring, so I think we're coming on to 17 next.
Right. How would you imagine the book different, say, if you wrote it 10 years ago?
Good question. I think 10 years ago it would have had a similar tone to now. I think if I had written it like a year after, I think that eating disorder voice was still stronger the first year that I exited treatment and entered what we would, for lack of better words, call the real world. That first year was very hard, and I named that in the part that I wrote at the end of the book. That the first year was challenging. You're trying to do all these things that you did in a treatment center that you learned how to do, and they were hard for a long time, but then they became more manageable in the confines of a treatment center, which feels pretty safe. And then you try to do the same things in the real world and it feels harder.
I think one thing that your journals is part of her program, they had to write every day.
Mm-hmm.
They had to journal every day. It wasn't an option. So when she was writing to leave the program, they had to kind of write a thesis. Remember your 26-page paper that talked about this kind of rough path. And so we took the journal entries from those 26 pages. So those were written right while she was in treatment. But then her reflection at the end of the book about recovery was written later.
So for both of you, how do you hope light helps others, those in struggle and those supporting someone with an eating disorder?
I hope that it lands in the hands of people that are needing something, that are maybe feeling lost or maybe feeling like they're not sure what to do because someone they know or themselves, maybe a loved one, maybe personally, they're experiencing something that feels confusing and they don't totally understand, and they're wondering if there's even a reason to have hope, which often is how, at least that's how I felt in my eating disorder. I was really unsure if there was even a reason to imagine that I could recover. So I hope that this book can provide a window for somebody else into a story where, through a lot of mess and then a lot of tidying, there is a reason to have hope. That would be my goal. I hope that the book lands where it needs to, and I trust that it will. It already has. We've heard from a couple of folks that have been able to connect the book to someone who really needed it, and that's felt really gratifying. And that's to me the whole goal, is that this book lands somewhere where it could positively impact a person and allow them to imagine a life of recovery for themselves or for somebody else.
Last night I was at a dinner and a woman came up to me and she said, I ordered 2 of your books, one to give to my brother whose daughter has anorexia. And the family doesn't really want to admit it. But she does, and she's sick. And they keep saying, well, she's going to get better any day and do better. So she goes, this book is going straight to them. So that was good to hear. Another woman came up to me a couple of weeks ago to say she read the book in one day. And perhaps I didn't know it, but she had an eating disorder that was flaring up, and she was starting treatment.
I talked to a woman today. I was having a meeting at work with a person who I was meeting with them about their child, and I didn't even know that she knew that we wrote a book, but she said, I bought the book that you and your mom wrote, and she said, I'm halfway through, and she's a doctor, and she said, we didn't learn a lot about anorexia in medical school. So she was really excited to read the book because it offered her a story that she may someday be able to connect a patient towards. So I think those are the situations that we hope that this book can continue to, sort of shed some light on.
That we did try to weave some science into the book because I thought that was important.
Mhm.
Now, so if someone new came to the book, where'd you recommend them? Where would you recommend them to begin? Nancy's voice, Rachel's voice, or kind of an interplay between both?
I would say just start at the top, go from page 1 and see where it takes you.
Perfect. Now, if people want to, as you say, find a copy of the book, where's the best place they could go to?
Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, the Rootstock website, and then
The local
we're hearing that
booksellers.
yeah, we're hearing that in some independent booksellers. We found a few copies in a store in Memphis. There's some sprinkled through shops in Vermont. Certainly online is a great way, though, if you don't have access to a local bookseller in Vermont or Memphis, where we know there may be some copies.
Right. And even going to your local library and requesting them to
Right.
get a copy and put in your
Even
local
better.
library.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, you two, and I appreciate the conversation, and looking forward then, Nancy, to your next book. Then, Nancy, you're going to be writing books more often.
No, Mark's going to be writing the next book.
Well, we'll see.
I'm taking a vacation for a little bit. This might be important, but I do have the phone number for the eating disorders hotline.
Okay.
It's a 24/7 phone line, and it's a free helpline staffed by licensed therapists. And that number is 1-866-662-1235.
Perfect. And then and so our listeners of this, you'll be able to see the show notes, and we'll have a link to the helpline there, and any websites that are going to be available will be available in the show notes.
Thank you so much for interviewing.
Yes, thank you, Barney.
Yes, you're welcome.